Please check your audio and video settings, please. Guys, please check your audio and video settings, please. Yes, guys. Okay. Look at yesterday's example. 613. Yesterday, we noticed one thing, guys. Our application is rollbacking transaction only for checked exception. No, you should roll back unchecked exceptions. You should roll back even for unchecked exception. Basically, it is rollbacking transaction for unchecked exception. You should even roll back for what? Unchecked exceptions. Then what should I do? Then what should I do? Where should I specify? How should I specify? Okay, let's see these guys. Go to aop-beans.xml. Go to aop-beans.xml. Yes, guys. aop-beans.xml. So here you observe we have so many attributes, guys. No rollback for. Rollback for is there na, guys? Rollback for. Rollback for. Okay, let me take one checked exception this time. Okay, checked exception. I think illegal access exception, illegal argument exception is unchecked, guys. Illegal access exception is checked exception. Java.lang. Illegal access exception. Illegal access exception. Okay, guys. Okay. Achha, first of all, let me prove that. First of all, let me prove that. Let me prove that it is not rollbacking the transaction. It is not rollbacking the transaction for checked exception. Yeah, Virat Singh, I did it. Okay, concentrate. Where is that? Service class, bank transaction management, IMPL boss. IMPL. It is not throwing runtime exception. It is throwing illegal argument exception. Illegal argument exception. Sorry, not illegal. Illegal access exception. Illegal access exception. Illegal access exception. Okay. So illegal access exception, observe. F3 source code. It is having direct reflective operation exception. Okay. Reflective operation exception is having what? Super class of exception. So indirectly it is what here? Checked exception. Are you with me, boss? It is not subclass of runtime exception. It's a subclass of something. When it is a checked exception, here also throws should be there. Throws illegal access exception, guys. Illegal access exception. right? If you have there in the interface also, that should be there. So that's why unchecked exceptions are cool. Throws, tell me guys, illegal access exception. Illegal access exception. Super. Okay, now gone, guys. But now, first of all, let me show. Uh, okay, we have a SQL prompt today. We'll manage with SQL prompt. Select star from spring underscore tx underscore bank. Okay, this is the data, guys. This is the data we have. So I will go for local transaction management 1001, 1002, perfect. 1001, 1002, perfect. Right click, run on Java application. Money transferred, guys. Money transferred. 8,560. Do everything is happening smoothly. But now I'm giving source number which is not there. I'm giving source number, but this time application is throwing what exception, guys? Unchecked exception. Let's see, guys. It says transaction rolled back, money not transferred. But observe this. Observe this. Here 70,000 has come. Why? By default, okay, by default, transaction manager is there, rollbacking the transaction only when business method throws unchecked exception. Since I am throwing checked exception, it is not rollbacking transaction. Whatever job done, that is committed. Did you observe this, guys? Did you observe this, guys? Actually, now transaction rolled back. 65,000 should remain as it is 65,000. But now it is actually it is changed to 70,000, boss. Is now changed to 70,000. Too bad or not? It's a too bad or not? Come on. Okay, guys. Very dangerous. To overcome this danger, I want to request. Somehow I have, somehow my application is having requirement of checked exception. For example, uh, using throws advice, I am converting. Using throws advice, I am converting technology specific DAO-ized exception to project specific exception. Unfortunately, that project specific exception they designed as what? Checked exception. That time so when those exceptions are raised, also transaction should roll back or not. Unfortunately, they by mistake or what, because of some other reasons, somehow they are forced to design as a checked exception. So when checked exception is happening, transaction is not rollbacking. Suppose this method is having one throws advice, that throws advice is converting technology specific DAO-ized exception to project specific user defined exception, but somehow it is a checked exception. For that exception, it is not rollbacking transaction. It looks very danger or not? It looks very danger or not? Are you analyzing, boss? Yes. To avoid that danger, what should I do? Roll back for java.lang. Illegal access exception. Java.lang. What exception, guys? Illegal access exception. Now, same situation, same input. Now, let's see what happens. Java application. Transaction is committed or rolled back. It is giving message, but it is reflecting in the database properly or not. See, guys, this time 75 is not coming. 70,000 only coming. Did you observe that, boss? 70,000 only coming. So that means it is rollbacking transaction even for unchecked, even for checked exception or not. So this is very important, boss. Yeah. Generally, In Spring transaction management, the transaction manager rollbacks the transaction only for business method or its advisors raised even advisor raised unchecked exceptions and its advisors raised unchecked exceptions. Raised unchecked exceptions, guys. Advisors raised unchecked exceptions. Are you listening my statement, guys? Okay. But to make transaction manager to roll back the transaction for certain checked exceptions. Okay, checked exceptions. We need to specify. We need to specify the list of exceptions in rollback for attribute of tx colon attributes tag. What tag, guys? tx colon attributes tag. In rollback for attribute of tx colon attributes tag, guys. Are you listening my statement, boss? tx colon attributes tag. tx colon attributes tag. Okay, transaction rolled back, money is not transferred, boss. Illegal argument exception. Transaction rolled back, money is not transferred. Is that clear, boss? Yeah, how to specify that one, boss? Here we have to specify like this, and let me highlight this. Where I should write in AOP-beans.xml. In AOP-beans.xml, this is the story. Okay, boss. Done. Right. Okay, let me write some more concepts. Yeah, this concept is very useful. This concept is very useful. Very useful if the throws advice. This concept is very useful if the throws advice configured for business method is translating the DAO raised. Okay, guys. The DAO raised technology specific exception to. This concept is very useful if the throws advice configured for business method is translating the DAO raised technology specific exception to. Okay, exception to project specific user defined checked exception. Project specific user defined checked exception. Okay, guys. Now listen. Yeah, Ravi, can I write java.lang.exception for all exception? You can do that. You can do that, no problem. You can mention superclass. Right. This is one thing, boss. Next. Array, array, if my business method is taken more than certain amount, I want to see for execution, for completing the execution, I want to see transaction getting rolled back. So for that purpose, we are having timeout. Timeout. Now I want to know timeout in seconds, guys. Timeout in seconds. Suppose if it is taking more than 10 seconds time for completing execution. Okay, fine. 15, 20 I will take. More than 20 seconds time to complete the execution. More than 20 seconds time to complete the execution. Though everything is perfect, it should not commit the transaction, it should roll back the transaction. Sure, sir. Yes. Okay, right now I cannot delay intentionally, boss, but I can keep thread.sleep. Thread.sleep 20,000 milliseconds, catch, exception E dot print stack trace. Okay, I'm delaying for 20, okay, 22 seconds. Okay, 20 seconds is the timeout period. I am delaying for 22 seconds. Now you observe perfect inputs I am giving. 1001, 1002 perfect inputs I am giving. Now you observe run the application. It takes certain amount of time. Right now it is taking certain amount of time, boss. Okay, sleep my application sleeping the method 22 seconds. But after 20-second transaction manager realizes timeout. So let me roll back the transaction though everything is smooth. Oh, transaction committed, money transferred. Very bad, guys. It should not be like this. Then why it is not happening? 20 timeout. I'm mentioning timeout nicely now, boss. Why it is not reflecting so far? That's fine. AOP-beans.xml. Let's look at this. Okay, 80,000, 75,000. What's happening? 1 minute. Let me put this thread.sleep before completing the job. Before completing the job. 22,000 means 22 seconds. Okay. So I will make it 25. I'll make it 25. Local transaction management. What's happening, guys? Actually, 21 is sufficient, but I'm wantedly taking bit extra time so that this 20 seconds will trigger. This 20 seconds will trigger, but somehow that 20 seconds is not triggering. Yes, I think now it's happening. I think somewhere something is not saved earlier. I think earlier not saved. Transaction timed out exception, guys. Okay, transaction timed out exception. Okay, transaction deadline was at this time, it was the deadline, but it is not complete. Okay, it should not, it is not completed. It is not completed. That's why deadline was. Okay, to specify transaction timeout period, boss. Earlier also it might have worked, but maybe I have not saved something properly. To specify transaction timeout period. Transaction timeout period. Okay. So very simple, boss. I'm taking this entire tag. Okay, come here. Transaction timeout period. Okay, not a issue. Bold, guys. Transaction timeout 20 in seconds. In seconds. Okay, guys. Transaction timeout period, boss. Okay. Fine, boss. Next one. Now listen, guys. Now I would like to talk about transaction attributes, guys. This is major information. Yeah, in real time, in multiple places, it is used now, boss. Rahul Kumar. I don't think at this stage I should explain that. Okay, in banking applications, it will be used. Online payments application, it will be used. In multiple places, it should be used, right? Should I explain that, guys? Where transaction timeout is used? In online payments. In online payments, it is used. OTP is end user activity, leave it. Okay, but this is really useful in multiple places, banking applications. Okay, useful in online payments, online payments, banking applications, net banking kind of applications, and etc. Fine. Okay. Next one is what, guys? Transaction attributes. Yeah. Now listen. Listen, care. Actually, OTP is a different story, boss. OTP is having end user involvement. When end user involvement is there, it is different game. So you think about transaction that is dealing with some persistence activities, some business server side activities. Transaction attribute. Now tell me, right now, are we beginning transaction or transaction manager is beginning transaction? Yes. Transaction manager will begin the transaction. What do you say, guys? Transaction attributes. Now tell me who roll back the transaction? Transaction manager. Okay. Now listen. In declarative transaction management, in declarative transaction management, okay, programmer, programmers, programmers do not begin and commit or roll back the transactions. Okay. All these activities, all these activities will be taken care by transaction manager, will be taken care by transaction manager. All these activities will be taken care by transaction manager. Are you understanding my statement, boss? Come on. Okay, boss. Now listen, guys. This transaction manager, this transaction manager may run the business method by applying transaction, by applying what, new transaction, or by by continuing or propagating, continuing or propagating caller business method. Caller, array, one business method calling another business method. Already in that business method, transaction may be there. So same transaction also will be there in new business method. For example, BM1 business method is internally calling BM2 business method. So BM2 business method may run with new transaction. BM2 business method may run with same transaction that is started in BM1, right? By applying, by continuing or propagating caller business method transaction or client started transaction, client supplied transaction, caller business method supplied transaction, okay, oblique client supply transaction, or okay, by having no transaction. There's a possibility of it is running the business method without transaction also. Anything, because transaction manager na boss, anything is possible. All these are decided based on transaction attribute, which is also called transaction propagation attribute. Propagation attribute that is configured on the business method. That is configured on the business method. Are you getting my point, guys? Right. So listen, in declarative transaction management, business method may run with new transaction, or caller method supply transaction, or no transaction. All these things are decided based on the transaction attribute that is configured on the business method. Nothing but this one, boss. Whether this business method runs with a new transaction, client supply transaction, or no transaction will be decided by this transaction attribute. So we have multiple transaction attributes, guys. Transaction attributes are, tell me, guys, required, next, requires underscore new, requires underscore new, supports, next, supports, never, mandatory. Okay, 6 are there, boss. Never, mandatory. Last one is what? Not supported. Not supported. Okay, what is default, guys? Suppose I didn't mention anything here. I didn't mention anything here. By default, it is pointing to what, guys? Required. If nothing is specified, default is what? Required, boss. Okay, guys. Default value is required. Did you notice it, boss? Right. Okay, guys. So if nothing is specified, required, and mostly used is also required. Required. And it is a default. And also mostly used one. And it is also mostly used one, guys. It is also literally solidly mostly used word. Okay, fine. So how does each one behaves, boss? Shall we understand how required works? Required. Listen carefully. If client or caller, array, there are two possibilities to call the business method of service class. Another business method can call or client can call. Come on. Two possibilities are there. If client or caller method calls business method with transaction, calls business method with transaction, then business method runs in same transaction. That means client client application logics or caller method logics and our business method logics on all together do everything or nothing principle will be applied. On all things together do everything or nothing principle will be applied. Are you listening my statement, guys? If client or caller method is called business method with transaction, then business method runs in same transaction. Otherwise business method runs in new transaction. Business method runs in new transaction. Are you getting my point? So let me present this one in a table format. Calls only. Calls. Continuation only. Okay. Fine, boss. So that let me present this one in a diagrammatic format, boss. So this is client application or caller method, guys. Let us assume some code is there. Some code is there. After that, BM1 business method is there. BM1 business method is there. End of the story. Here is my BM1 business method, boss. Here is my BM1 business method. Okay. And what is the transaction attribute that I configured? Is required. What is the transaction attribute that I configured, guys? It is required. It is required, boss. Now tell me. It has called BM1 business method. All the statements that are there in BM1 business method executed, comes back. These statements will execute. So let us assume client or caller method is calling this business method with T1 transaction. Okay, BM1 business method also execute having same T1 transaction. And here also same T1 transaction will continue. That means this all three sets of statements will be executed in the same transaction. Do everything or nothing principle will be applied on this set of statement, this set of statement, and this set of statements together. Are you comfortable, guys? Come on. Suppose there are two possibilities. This business method may call, the caller method may call business method without transaction. May call business method without transaction. Are you getting my point there, guys? Yes. Okay, guys. Here, no transaction. There's a possibility of calling no transaction. Then what happens, boss? Okay. Then business method. This business method runs in T2 transaction, which is nothing but new transaction. Which is nothing but new transaction. I hope this is explaining more clearly. Yes or no? Na? Right. Ravi, Ravi, Ravi. My, you are assuming DAO methods as destination methods, but I am assuming service class method itself another destination method. Think in that angle, or you may think in that angle also, boss. You are calling service class method with the transaction. Okay, DAO methods also executing in same transaction, right? But don't think in that angle. You think about one service class method calling another service class method, or client calling service class method, and a transaction attribute is there on service class method. Generally, we don't apply transaction attributes on DAO methods. Transaction attributes will be applied on service class method. So our destination method is service class method. You have to think in that angle. Service calling DAO is quite natural, but we are not applying transaction attribute on DAO methods. Where our destination methods are now what? Service class method. Think in that angle. Requires new. Requires new. Yeah, what is this? Business method always runs in new transaction, irrespective of whether client application or caller method calls the business method with or without transaction. As name says, guys, you can blindly go by name. Business method always runs in new transaction, irrespective of whether client application or caller method calling the business method with or without transaction. Array, always business method runs in a new transaction. That is what I am trying to say. Copy this, boss. Paste, boss. What is the transaction attributes, my dear? Requires underscore new. Requires underscore new. Tell me. T1 new transaction. T2, boss. Here T2 new transaction. Yeah, what happens to T1, sir? T1 will be suspended. Only on these lines do everything or nothing principle will be applied. Only on these lines new. It's indirectly sub-transaction kind of thing, boss. Okay. Next, client has called business method no transaction. Then also new transaction. Once the control comes back here, no transaction will be continued. Once the control comes back here, no transaction will be continued. Is that clear, guys? Here, no transaction will be continued. Okay. Super, boss. Next, supports. Next one is what? Supports. Yeah, what support says? Support says if client application or caller calls the business method, client application or caller method calls the business method with the transaction, then business method executes in that transaction. Otherwise, business method runs without transaction. Business method runs without transaction. Clear, guys? If called, takes it. If not called, it won't take it. Okay, guys. Yes, boss. Now listen. Let me put the diagrammatic representation. Copy this, paste it. Copy this, paste it, guys. Here we are having supports. We are having what, guys? Supports. Supports, guys. Now T1. Seriously, T1 here. T1 means T1. T1, T1. T1, T1. Next, no transaction. What is next? No transaction. Here also no transaction. No transaction, no transaction. Okay, boss. I think you understood difference between required and supports. Required begins a new transaction when transaction is not there. But supports is not like this. Okay. New gives, takes it. Not there, not given, not does not take it. It won't think about behaving on its own. Next. Okay. Not supported. Not underscore supported. Not underscore supported. Business method. Business method always runs. Always runs in no transaction, irrespective of whether client application or caller method calls business method with or without transaction. With or without transaction. Copy, boss, paste. Copy, paste. Now tell me, not underscore supported. That means not supported. Correct spell is that only, na? Not underscore supported. Yes, boss. Not underscore supported. Not underscore supported. Tell me, guys, T1, T1. Okay. Business method is called with transaction. Then also no transaction. Then also no transaction. Okay. Client has called business method without transaction. Happily without transaction. So always business method runs without transaction. Clear, my dear? Next, mandatory. Mandatory. Okay, guys. Client application or caller method must call business method with transaction. With transaction. Otherwise, yeah, exception will be raised. That means definitely clients must call business method in transaction. If called without transaction, exception will be raised. Okay, boss. Right. T1, boss. T1. I think diagram is interesting, right? T1. When client is calling business method without transaction, exception will be raised. Exception. For what it is? It is for what? It is for mandatory transaction attribute. It is for mandatory transaction attribute. Supports, requires, new, required. Right. What is the last one? Never. Just reverse of mandatory, boss. Never. Reverse of this one. What's the meaning of that? Caller method or client application must call business method without transaction. Must call business method. Yeah. Let's call business method. Come on, guys. Must call business method. Must call business method without transaction. If called with a transaction, exception will come. Reverse of mandatory, boss. Client application or caller method must not call business method. Must not call business method having transaction. Must not call business method having transaction. If called, exception will be raised. If called, exception will be raised. What do you say, guys? If called, definitely exception will be raised. Yeah, one question will be there definitely on transaction attributes, boss. T1, here is no exception. T1, sorry, here exception. Exception. No transaction, happily business method runs without transaction. Okay. No transaction, business method runs without transaction. Okay, boss. Summary of transaction attributes. Summary of transaction attributes. I would like to give small table for it, boss. Small table, guys. Tell me, boss. Transaction attribute. Client or caller. Caller transaction. Client or caller transaction. Then what? Business method transaction. Business method transaction. Business method transaction. Okay. So now let's see. If a transaction attribute is required, client transaction T1, business method also runs in the same T1. For every attribute, two possibilities. Okay. No transaction, business method runs in new transaction. Okay. For everything, two possibilities, boss. Next, requires new. Requires new. Client or caller transaction. T1. Business method T2. Okay, I need not to tell T2 new transaction every time, boss. You are intelligent enough. Okay, no transaction. Business method runs in new transaction. T2 new transaction. Come on, guys. Array, in the name only everything is there. In the name only everything is there. I hope you are feeling it. Feeling it or not? Done. You are not active, boss. Supports. Supports. T1. Business method runs in what? Same T1 transaction. Okay. Only two possibilities are there for client, guys. Calling business method with a transaction or without transaction. Okay. Business method also runs without transaction. No transaction, boss. Super. Done. Next. Next. Not supported. Not underscore supported. Client T1. T1. T1, boss. Hey, sorry. T1 also no transaction. Okay. Client no transaction. Then this also no transaction. This also no transaction. Cool, guys. Next. Mandatory. Mandatory. T1. T1. Here. No transaction. Exception. Exception. Next. Never is reverse. Never is reverse of mandatory. T1 exception. Next, no transaction. What is this? No transaction. No transaction T1. I'll murder you, Priyanka. Never, never. Okay, got it, boss. I think you got crystal clear clarity, boss. Fine. So I want to show practicals, but I can show practicals only in one angle. What is that angle, you know? My client application is calling business method. Ajay Kumar, as usually, innocent doubt. Requires new. T1, T2 requires new. See the name, rar dirty fellow. Requires new. Where did you do schooling, boss? Requires new. Always new transaction. Still problem, Ajay Kumar? Ajay Kumar says it should be T1. No T1. There, not there. It runs business method with new transaction only. Basic English, guys. Then what happened to T1? That is suspended. T1 is suspended. I think I have written that one also. Requires new. Requires new transaction. In this situation, T1 is suspended. Which situation? Here, this one. T1 is suspended. Right, boss. Mr. Ajay Kumar, listen class properly, man. Basic English also, if you confuse, what can I do? Now listen. All these attributes I can demonstrate, no doubt in that, but I can demonstrate only in one angle. What is that one angle? Client application calling business method without transaction. But right now, My client is not having any transaction, guys. Are you listening? Only one angle. That means 6 attributes, 6 combinations I can show, not 12 combinations. Why? Because right now my business method is called by client directly, and client is not having any transaction, and I don't have any thought of giving any transaction also. Sir, when can I feel client calling? When can I feel business method called with transaction by client? Okay, you cannot feel that, but when business method is called by other business method, if other business method is having transaction, okay, that can be propagated. That can be propagated. But right now we don't have that setup, guys. In future, if comes, I will try to demonstrate. But as of now, we have a setup of what? Client calling business method, not the business method calling business method. So client always calls business method without transactions, right? Okay, boss. So now required already we enjoyed, but one more time let me show. Here what is there required? Client is calling business method without transaction. Okay. Then also business method runs with a new transaction. That means only in the business method, new transaction will be started, boss. Only in the business method, new transaction will be started. So forget about timeout, guys. Now let's come to the story. So let's see. Okay, come do everything I don't want to give, because when success comes, nothing we can felt. Okay, now do every, here transaction is rolled back on ATA. Why, sir? Client is calling business method without transaction, having required attribute. Required attribute runs business method with a new transaction. That means here to here new transaction. At the beginning transaction starts, at the end commits are rollback. If everything goes smoothly, it will commit. If something goes wrongly, it will roll back. Only for this statement, new transaction. Let's see whether it is happening or not. Happening, boss. Already we tested it. See, transaction rolled back. Why? Because 1006 account is not there. That's why you observe nothing is modified. Balance amounts are not modified. Okay, cool, guys. Next, requires new. Requires underscore new. Again, business method is called without transaction. Again, business method is called without transaction. Are you listening my statement, guys? Requires new. Again, business method runs without with the transaction. What transaction? New transaction, existing transaction, new transaction. New transaction means only transfer method statements will be there in a separate transaction. So that means what? Since 1006 is not there, again transaction will be rolled back. Rolled back. Now that's why you observe no change in the balances. Okay, cool, guys. Next, supports. Now you will feel. Now you will feel difference. Supports. Client is calling business method without transaction. Okay, business method runs with the transaction, without transaction. Type in the chat box. Now business method runs with the transaction, without transaction. Without transaction. That means no transaction is applied on business method. But I am calling 1006, 1001. 1006 account is not there. No problem. Still 1001 withdraw will be committed. Why? No transaction. Business method is running without transaction. See, remaining all are demonstration purpose only. Mostly regularly used attribute is what? Required. Blindly use required. Money not transferred is giving exception kind of thing. But you observe, guys, withdraw taken place. Ayo, why withdraw not taken place? Withdraw should take place now, boss. Business method is running without transaction. So bad, so bad. Wait, maybe I have not changed here. Actually changed but not saved. Changed but not saved. Now run freshly. Now run freshly. Because exception came, it says transaction rolled back. but business method has run without transaction. That's why observe 75-75. Still withdrawn, though deposit is not done. Withdrawn the money, deposit is not done. Are you feeling transaction attribute effect? Now, business method is running without transaction or not? Cool, guys. Okay, next one. Not supported. Not supported. Tell me, guys, business method runs without transaction or not? Business method runs without transaction or not? Okay. So that means what? Though the deposit failed, withdraw will be done. Array, go and search in the internet also. This much clarity will not be there. Okay. Everyone works with required enough. But I'm trying to demonstrate all transaction attribute. 70-75 further deducted. Another 5,000 deducted because business method is running without transaction, boss. I'm not saying use all of them. I'm saying how they works. These are the possibilities. But most regularly used is required. In my lifetime, I have worked only with required, boss. I never seen any use case working with other one. Maybe there, but I never come across that. Okay, boss. Next. Mandatory. Mandatory. Now can you guess what happens? Client is calling business possible. Client is calling business method without transaction. Mandatory says business method must be called with transaction. So what happens? Exception will come. Exception will come. No wrong result, but exception will come. What exception? Illegal transaction state exception. No existing transaction found for transaction marked with propagation mandatory. Array, my dear, client is calling business method, but I didn't find any existing transaction. I didn't find any existing transaction. That's why I'm throwing exception. Guys, enjoyed or not? My theory and practicals are matching or not? Yes, boss. Next. Lastly, never. Tell me, never means what happens? Our business method runs with when business method runs without transaction, with transaction. Our business method runs in this situation without transaction. Happy. Because client should not call business method with a transaction. If you called exception, anyhow client is calling without transaction, boss. So happily business method runs without transaction. Business method runs without transaction means what? See, though deposit failed, withdraw will be committed. 65,000. Here 70,000, here 65,000. I think all 6 transaction attributes are successfully observed or not. What is the most regularly used transaction attribute, guys? Required. So I want you people to keep required only. Okay. I think now you enjoyed practically what is transaction management. Effortlessly, we are able to work with what? Transaction management given by Spring. Am I writing JDBC style con dot commit, con dot rollback, con dot set auto commit? No. Tomorrow on this application, I want to go to Hibernate style per transaction. Still same code, guys. Our coding will never change. Our coding will, even though you change it to persistence logic to Hibernate in DAO classes, still same code. Our coding style will never change. Are you getting my point, guys? Super. Right. Okay. Tomorrow when we meet, we will try to convert this application into annotation driven transaction management. Next. annotation driven transaction management application. Next, 100% code driven transaction management application. Then Spring Boot driven transaction management application. Over. After that, okay, guys. After that, come on. Okay, after that, I will take example application on distributed transaction management. I bet most of the Spring learners don't never concentrates on what? Distributed transaction management, but we are going to study. We are going to study in what? XML plus annotation model, and we are also going to study in Spring Boot model what are distributed transaction management. 2PC protocol we are going to feel very much practically. With the transaction management will be over, then I will start Spring MVC. That also we will discuss. XML style very less importance, annotation style more importance, 100% code again little importance, and again more importance to Spring Boot. Then Spring Security, then small miscellaneous topics like what Spring Mail, like that our talk, things will go on. MVC duration, MVC itself takes 30 days. That is a big topic. After core module, another big topic is MVC. Spring Data JPA will not be covered in this batch, but I will provide recordings. Right. I will provide recordings. Okay. Max another 30 to 35 sessions. 30 to 35 sessions maximum, boss. Thank you. Have a nice time. Yeah. Next week, we will enter into MVC, Spring MVC. Thank you, guys. Have a nice time. We'll meet tomorrow.